Hey, it's been a minute since I've done one of these videos, but I have finally completed the majority of the Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree DLC. I say the majority rather than fully completed because I know there's bound to be some keyboard warrior in the comments telling me that I didn't fully complete it because I missed one of the catacombs located in the most obscure area of the massive map. But more on that later. Anywho, it looks like I picked the best time to get into Elden Ring. For those unaware, I only just started playing this game at the start of this year. I would then get all of the achievements for the game and make a review video on it, which absolutely blew up in comparison to my other videos. Shortly after this review was posted, we got the gameplay reveal trailer for this DLC, which was actually announced only a year prior. But now, we had in-game footage of what to expect for this DLC. Needless to say, I, along with every other Elden Ring player, were ecstatic when watching the gameplay reveal trailer, and even more so when at the end of the trailer, they gave us a release date, June 21st, 2024. That being said, although I was enjoying other games at the time, I knew that none of these games would compare to what I was about to experience come June 21st. As a matter of fact, I was so excited for the DLC that even a few days before it launched, I got on the game to help people beat Mohg, since From Software made it very clear that the DLC would be accessed by interacting with Miquella's arm located in Mohg's boss room. Did it go well? Oh, he died. For two people it did, that's gotta count, right? My apologies to those I couldn't help. Hopefully you found someone to comment azure him. My failures aside, once we finally got to the release date, I was informed at the last minute that I had to work overtime that weekend, Saturday and Sunday. Not complaining though, because getting paid more is always nice, and it's not like the DLC was a time-gated event unlike some other games. I'll admit, the only thing I expected from this DLC was that it was going to be harder than the base game, because that's usually the case with these From Software games. Personally, I can only confirm that this is true for Dark Souls 1 since I have yet to experience the DLCs for Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls 3, and Bloodborne. Regardless, I was more than ready to experience everything this DLC had to offer, and let's just say right off the bat that I had an amazing time with this DLC. Shouldn't come as a surprise given that after one playthrough of the base game, it already became my all-time favorite. The base game's just that good, what can I say? Now, if you're interested in my experience with the DLC, I uploaded a series of videos on it which can be found on my channel. With that being said, this video is going to be going over my opinions and impressions of the DLC after my first playthrough of it. However, I will say that I am still going through some of the miscellaneous things in the DLC and will definitely be playing through it again on another character. Without further ado, let's get into it. Before I begin, I want to say that this review will be split into two sections, the first being mostly spoiler free and the second going all in with spoilers. Please do keep that in mind. I will obviously inform you of when I start taking a deep dive into spoiler territory. All good? Alright, let's go.
Touch the withered arm, and you too will be transported.
My first impression upon entering the Land of Shadow was that the starting area drew some parallels to Limgrave from the base game. Just a big open area that you can explore to your heart's content. Similar to the base game, the Sites of Grace do point you in the direction of where you should go, however, it's not mandatory to go there immediately. And if you thought that the base game encouraged exploring, the DLC makes it seem mandatory for two main reasons. The first one is that From Software somewhat lied about the map being the size of Limgrave. The starting area may be, but without treading into spoiler territory, the map is pretty big with the main story taking you through most of it. I loved how diverse the map was for the most part, and I will touch more on my favorite parts of the map in the spoiler section. However, there are some parts of the map that are just massive spaces with not much to do there. Again, I don't want to tread too deep into spoiler territory just yet. You'd be surprised how much of the DLC's map you can explore right from the beginning without fighting a single boss, and it seems intended given how you level up in the DLC. Which brings me to the second reason as to why exploration seems mandatory. From Software knew very well that people would try to enter the DLC at the highest level they could possibly get to in an attempt to make the DLC easier just by being overleveled. To combat this, they made all of the enemies' stats scale equally with your stats, with the only way to level up and gain an advantage against them being to explore the world and find Shadow Tree fragments and revered spirit ashes. Yes, apparently this is pronounced as Shadow Tree and not Skadoo Tree. It's supposedly the Old English spelling for it, and they also use Old English spelling for this word, which is pronounced as jail.
I'm going to jail!
Regardless of how you pronounce it, you can level up your Shadow Tree Blessing and Revered Spirit Ash Blessing at Sites of Grace, both of which go up to level 20, and with each level you get an increase to your stats which will eventually surpass that of the enemies in the DLC. The Shadow Tree Blessing increases your level, whereas the Revered Spirit Ash Blessing increases the level of your Spirit Ash summons as well as Torrent. Yes, even Torrent gets buffs in the DLC. And believe me, you're gonna need everything you can get because this DLC is hard. Shocking, right? From Software looked at all of the criticisms people had about Elden Ring being easy, although for most people it's not, and they took that personally. Yes, this DLC is hard. Some may argue that it's too hard, and to that I say you're not completely wrong. Even the basic mobs hit like a truck in the DLC. Then you have the bosses whose difficulty in my opinion is on par with Melania. I won't talk too much about them now because I want to save it for the spoiler section, but let me tell you, these bosses are no joke, especially the Remembrance bosses. Which is why you need to take the time and explore. Find all of the Shadow Tree fragments. There's 50 total and plenty of guides online showing you how to get all of them. Additionally, just a few days after the DLC launched, From Software released a patch that further increased the stat buffs you get from the Shadow Tree Blessings. From my experience, both before and after the patch, once you get your Shadow Tree Blessing to level 12 and beyond, that's when you really start to notice a difference. That being said, please go find the fragments and level up. I promise you the difficulty doesn't feel as bad once you do. Also, feel free to use everything that the game has to offer. I am sick of seeing all of these elitists claiming that players who use things like cheesy builds, Spirit Ash summons, or co-op summons haven't actually completed the game. It is a single player game and players have every right to use every tool that they are given. One of those players being Miyazaki himself, who in an interview recently said that even he uses things like Mimic Tier because he's admittedly not that good at the game. So if the creator of the game uses it, so can you. Don't feel discouraged and don't feel ashamed of doing it. You are playing the game like everyone else and you should not be criticized just because you choose not to make the game even harder for you. In my playthrough, I did not use summons of any kind except for 2 occasions which I will talk about in the spoiler section of the video. My reasoning for not using summons was simply because I respect the 1v1. This also meant that I didn't have to go looking for Revered Spirit Ashes. However, I did use some cheesy builds, which let me tell you, there's lots of in this game, even more so with the new weapons they added. When the DLC first launched, they literally gave us a pocket nuke in the form of perfume bottles. Long story short, there was a bug with one of the Ashes of War that caused them to do absurd amounts of damage. This is not my gameplay on the screen because the only time I tried this perfume bottle build was against the final boss in the DLC, which I'm obviously not going to show as of yet. But as you can see, this is straight up nuking bosses like Darkbead from Dark Souls 1. This has since been fixed in patch 1.12.3, but I will forever cherish the memories of showing my friends how to absolutely delete bosses with literal lightning in a bottle. Including the perfume bottles, there are 8 new weapon types in the game. I won't list them all because I'm too lazy to do so, but here's a screenshot of them from the Elden Ring wiki. Personally, I have only tried the backhand blades, great katanas, and light great swords. The other weapons not so much, but from what I've heard, the beast claws are pretty good in PvP, the thrusting shields are incredibly strong in PvE, and hand to hand is really cool, but it doesn't really do a lot of damage. Out of the ones I tried, I gotta say that I think they're all just okay. Nothing too crazy. One of my friends really likes the backhand blades, but that's about it. Another thing that kind of sucks is that yes, we get all of these new weapon types in the game, but we don't really get a lot of weapons for those types. At most, there's only 3 weapons per new weapon type, so not much variety to choose from. They do get unique Ashes of War, which is nice, but again, there's not much to really choose from. Quite sad, but I can understand why this decision was made. Not only is this DLC already loaded with content, but it would really suck if a lot of really cool and possibly overpowered weapons were locked behind a paid DLC. With the already countless build possibilities in Elden Ring, this DLC only adds more to it, which further increases the game's overall replayability. And believe me, you're gonna want to play the DLC again because the story was surprisingly good. Now before I get into the story, I just want to inform you all that I will now start to talk about spoilers. If you don't want to be spoiled, please skip to this timestamp you see on screen. Alright, spoiler talks in 3, 2, 1... go! Like other FromSoft games, I had to watch some lore videos to properly understand the story of the DLC. Supposedly, the Land of Shadow is the missing puzzle piece for the base game's map. The only thing is that this place is hidden and requires a special means of travel to get there. In our case, it's touching that arm sticking out of the cocoon in Mohg's boss room. But why is this place hidden, and how is it that the only way to enter is by interacting with Miquella's arm? Well, before I butcher any lore like I did in my original Elden Ring review, all I can really tell you is that after watching a few lore videos, what I could gather is that Miquella basically sacrificed his physical form in order to travel to the Land of Shadow. This place has quite a bit of significance to Queen Marika for several reasons. The first being that her home village is here and is actually a place that you can visit. You should visit this place because it's where you'll find one of the best talismans in the entire game. Going deeper into Queen Marika's lore, we find out that her people, the shamans, were slaughtered by the Horn Scent, and she got back at them by getting her son to lead a fiery crusade against them. Oh yeah, that's Melena's brother, by the way. Marika would then make her way to the Gate of Divinity and ascend to godhood, which is actually what we see in the trailer. Afterwards, Inner Elim would be sealed off with impenetrable thorns similar to the Erdtree in the base game when you first reach there. This is to prevent anyone else from ascending to godhood, and for good measure she completely hid the realm. Fast forward to now, where Miquella finds his way into the Land of Shadow to essentially follow in his mother's footsteps. His goal is to usher in a new age of compassion, and at first, Miquella seems like a nice guy. He's even got followers to back him up. I mean, throughout the base game's lore, we're told that Miquella wants to oppose the old order and start his new age of peace. That seems like a great idea. I'm with that. But then, you finally play the DLC and realize that this child is actually a monster. He has the power to charm people and essentially brainwash them into doing whatever he wants. The worst part is that he's been doing this since before he entered the Land of Shadow, and we have indirectly helped see his plan through. He sent Malenia after Radahn to weaken him so that we would kill him and send his soul to the Land of Shadow. He also charmed Mohg into kidnapping him and put this fake idea into Mohg's head that he would be Miquella's consort, when in reality he just wanted Mohg for his body. Honestly, that just sounds like a lot of people on modern dating apps. But anyways, so with Radahn's soul and Mohg's body, he basically makes his own little Frankenstein monster version of Radahn. You can actually see Mohg's horns on Radahn's body in the opening cutscene for the final boss fight. And during that fight, Radahn even uses blood flame attacks. Turns out that Mohg was innocent all along. In a year where several people haven't beaten the allegations, Mohg was the one that did. He was just a pawn in Miquella's grand scheme. Even what we do throughout the DLC was a part of his plan. He needed us to kill Mesmer and get his kindling to burn the sealing tree so that he can access Inner Elim and the Gate of Divinity so that he can ascend to godhood. He would then use his godlike powers along with the Frankenstein monster as his consort to start his new age of compassion, where he would basically brainwash everyone for eternity. I don't know about you, but that's a hard pass for me. Seems like the writers agree, given that we fight both of them at the end of the DLC. Now the fight itself I'll go over in a bit when I talk about the boss fights in greater detail, but the ending was just a flashback of a memory which was kind of underwhelming in my opinion. That aside, the story was pretty good. Keep in mind that I'm not a lore channel, and what I just explained was a very brief summary of what happens in the DLC story. I'm not even sure if it was a good summary, but it's what I was able to interpret after playing it myself as well as watching some videos. Obviously, it's not going to be for everyone because after playing through the story, reading item descriptions, and doing the NPC quest lines, it's still a tad bit confusing. Additionally, the NPC questlines are very missable. On my first playthrough, I downright missed most of the questlines because I was so focused on running through the bosses. However, after going through it again, I gotta say shout out Sir Ansbach and Theolier. Also, one more time, free Mohg! Now, for those smart people who actually use all of the tools put into the game, you can summon NPCs for most of the story's boss fights, which you should because they're hard. Much harder than the base game for sure. I'm not going to go over every single boss because there's over 40 of them, but there are 10 remembrance bosses as well as one secret boss that you do not want to miss. Like I mentioned in my spoiler-free section of the video, enemies in general throughout the DLC are much harder than the base game. They're more aggressive and they hit like a truck. The bosses also have a lot of moves that are designed to roll catch you, and they have combos that seem to never end. This makes them very frustrating to deal with and even more satisfying to beat. I will say that out of the remembrance bosses, my favorite is definitely Mesmer. Him being the poster boy of the DLC, it made sense that his boss fight was going to be very difficult, but also fair enough for it to be enjoyable. I also really liked the Divine Beast Dancing Lion, Radahn, Rellana, and Midra. Dancing Lion was insane for the first time around because for most players, myself included, this was the first Remembrance boss we fought. There is no boss in the base game that moves around like this one does, and at times it's very intimidating. Especially when the boss fight gets to the second phase where the lion is switching elements, it reminded me a lot of Sanctuary Guardian from Dark Souls 1's DLC. The constant barrage of attacks along with the music can be kind of overwhelming at times, but my goodness did it feel good to beat Dancing Lion. A similar thing could be said for Rellana, where her second phase is just a clusterfuck of fire and magic attacks. Midra I liked more for the setting of the fight, the abandoned mansion in the abyssal woods, which is honestly my second favorite part of the map. Very spooky vibe, which fits perfectly for Midra being a Lord of Frenzied Flame. It would have been cool to see a unique interaction with him if you also chose to be a Lord of Frenzied Flame. But I guess we'll never know. Also, when you're not being blasted by the Frenzied Flame and can actually listen to the boss's soundtrack, it sounds like something straight out of a horror movie. Then we have Radahn. All of the lore surrounding his character, the status he has, and the fact that he's the final boss fight for the story. Some people were upset with him being the final boss, but I liked it. His first phase isn't so bad, there's just a few combo strings you need to learn how to avoid, as well as 3 gravity magic attacks. It's the second phase where Radahn is fighting you and your PC. Pretty much all of his attacks are followed by a holy AoE that does stupid amounts of damage. He also gets some new moves, including Shadow Clones and a Holy Beam of Death. Oh yeah, he also has his signature Meteor Slam that he'll do once his health bar reaches below 25%. If you're not getting killed by him, then your frames definitely are. That aside, I think it's a satisfying final boss fight for the DLC, which is good because there were also some stinkers in this DLC. In my opinion, Meteor Mother of Fingers was a lackluster fight. The questline was very straightforward, which is good, but the boss fight was just incredibly mid in my opinion. Even if I didn't use the cheesy Great Shield poke strat, the boss basically just does a bunch of jumping slam attacks followed by some lasers and other projectile attacks in phase 2. Meteor can also summon those small hand enemies to chase you, but you can one-shot those if you're a decent Shadow Tree level. It's not a great boss fight overall, but it's not the worst. That title goes to Commander Gaius. Fuck Commander Gaius. All my homies hate Commander Gaius. This boss is straight up broken. They did change him up a little in the perfume bottle hotfix where he now always spawns in the same spot, but it doesn't change the fact that his boar charge attack has the most broken hitbox of any boss attack. I promise you, I have tried everything to dodge this attack, and nothing consistently works for me. The closest I've gotten to consistently dodging the attack is to light roll towards him. I'd love to show you footage of this, but on top of his hitbox being broken, for whatever reason, this boss fight in particular kept causing my game to crash while recording. Even the light show that is Radahn Phase 2 did not cause my game to crash like the Commander Gaius fight did. The rest of his moveset is aight, but that charge attack is just the dumbest thing ever. It does so much damage and it hits you twice. That one move alone is good enough for me to rank Gaius as the worst boss in the entire DLC. Fuck him and fuck his pants. As for the remaining Remembrance bosses, Shadow Tree Avatar was 3 phases of easy, Putrescent Knight had a horse, and Romina was a decent fight which gets downplayed a little because it's after the Mesmer fight. However, none of these bosses are my actual favorite boss in this DLC. Earlier, I mentioned that there was a secret boss. Now, if you've played the DLC from previous games, you'd know that FromSoft usually likes to have a really cool dragon boss at some point. Dark Souls 1 had Kalameet, Dark Souls 2 had Sin, Dark Souls 3 had Midir. So how does one create a dragon boss fight to top those 3? Well, the first thing you could do is start with looks. Everyone likes a cool looking dragon. You could also give that dragon really cool lore, which is reflected in how the dragon looks. Perhaps something along the lines of, this dragon is one of the oldest dragons in existence that lost his leg while fighting the literal Dragon Lord. And you could even see 2 of said Dragon Lord's heads still attached to this dragon. Yeah, that sounds good. What about the location? We've already had one by a waterfall, waterfall, one deep in an underground cave, and one where you gotta lie down in a specific spot to be teleported to a secret location. Honestly, let's just keep it simple. Have a mountain full of dragons and make the player scale all the way to the peak of said mountain. I'm surprised that hasn't been done before, to my knowledge at least. Okay, what else? I mean, most dragons in the game shoot fire or lightning at us, so why not combine the two? Sure, but how can we make this boss a little more meaningful? I got it. We associate an NPC with this dragon. What? That's already been done? Okay, what if we add a little more lore to it? What if this NPC has already fought with this dragon before and wants to run it back? Yeah, that could work, and we could even have that NPC be summoned to help us fight the dragon. However, we have a lot of boss fights in this DLC where you can summon an NPC, so what can we do differently to make this one special? How about we give him some of the greatest voice lines of any NPC done with superb voice acting by someone doing his first voice acting performance in a video game. That's it. That's what will make this dragon fight special. Wait, what? From Software actually did that? Where's the proof?
And summoning during a boss fight? Kinda crazy.
Curse you, Bale! Solid of scale you might be, foul dragon, but I will riddle with holes your rotten hide with a hail of harpoons with every last drop of my being!
Bale the Dread, for all reasons I just mentioned, is the coolest boss fight I have ever fought in any video game period. Additionally, the Jagged Peak has to be my favorite part of the map despite there not being much to do there. For the boss fight itself, I was Erdtree level 20 and I did use the Dragon Hunter's Great Katana for the boss fight. Those plus summoning Egon made Bale not the hardest boss fight, but overall the most enjoyable one for me. Easily my favorite boss fight in the entire game, and Egon is easily a top tier NPC right up there with Alexander. Now, although we give a lot of praise to Egon and the voice actor for nailing the performance, despite it being his first time voice acting in a video game, I think you should know that for a lot of voice actors in this DLC, it was also their first time voice acting, and I thought that the voice acting in general for this DLC was solid. Another thing that was solid throughout this DLC was the soundtrack. I've already mentioned some of the boss's themes, but my favorite is without a doubt Those United in Common Cause, which is the song that plays during the big NPC gank fight right before the final boss. It perfectly encapsulates the scene. Just as you're about to reach the end of your journey, you realize that your path heavily conflicts with the paths of your companions that you met along your journey. As a result, you're forced to fight them. On a side note, since it wasn't a fair 1v1, I decided to bring out the Mimic tier for this fight because I know if nobody else got me, then I got me. Back to the music, it reminded me of something like For Whose Sake from Yakuza Kiwami, where you have no choice but to fight your friend. This, plus the voice lines from all of the characters during the fight, make it quite the emotional roller coaster. It's even better if you actually do all of the NPC quest lines and summon both Tiolier and Sir Ansbach to help you during the fight, because they all talk to each other during the fight. I ain't gonna lie, besides Bale, that was probably the best part of the DLC for me. I guess the last thing I should touch on before wrapping up this review is the map. I already went over it but left out spoilers. Now let's really take a deep dive into the map. The Shadow Keep, no, not that Shadow Keep, this Shadow Keep, is easily the most content-dense legacy dungeon in the DLC. It'll take some time to navigate, there's quite a bit of loot to obtain, and there's 3 remembrance bosses associated with this location. Like I previously mentioned, I really like the spooky vibe of the Abyssal Woods and the epicness of scaling the Jagged Peak. However, although those places look cool and we have a good reason to go to those places, there actually isn't much to do in either of these locations. Besides being able to find Erdtree fragments in these locations, the Abyssal Woods is really just there to go fight Midra, and the Jagged Peak is just there to go fight Bale. That seems to be the issue with a good portion of areas in this DLC. Both of the Finger Runes, in my opinion, are honestly just there to get sucked and ring the bells to progress the questline for fighting Meter. Castle Ensis takes a good 10 minutes to fully explore and is honestly just there for Rellana's boss fight. Some parts, while very beautiful like the Cerulean Coast, are kinda just large open areas with not much to do there. Even Inner Elim, which is the final area of the DLC, is just a very linear path to the final boss with not much else to do there compared to Leyndell. Also, there's a whole portion of the map that requires a very specific method to access it. You need to find an emote and then use said emote in a specific location that's right by where the most annoying boss is, which means that unless someone tells you about it, you'll probably miss that whole section because you were too busy getting rammed by Gaius. It's cool having that little Easter egg, but it's also very missable, just like the NPC quests and certain items. Needless to say, with how the leveling system works and how missable certain things can be, you really have to take your time playing through this DLC. Despite my gripes with certain parts of the map, certain bosses, and performance issues from time to time, I genuinely enjoyed playing Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree. If you like Elden Ring, but you haven't picked up the DLC just yet for whatever reason that may be, I highly recommend that you get it if you can. For the price you pay, you essentially get a whole game's worth of content, which is sadly not something commonly seen in modern gaming anymore. I'm not even joking, Elden Ring could possibly be a contender for Game of the Year again. Shadow of the Erdtree somehow manages to feel like you're returning to the game you know and love, while also having that feeling of playing Elden Ring for the first time all over again. It's a new map that's absolutely massive, a story which you can't understand without watching a few videos, tons of new weapons and armor, along with bosses that make you want to scream obscenities after dying to them hundreds of times, only to have that one good run where you finally beat the boss and trigger that satisfying feeling that only Elden Ring players can feel when they beat a challenging boss. The DLC may not be perfect, but I love it regardless. Thank you From Software for putting a lot of care and love into this DLC. It was definitely worth the wait in my opinion, but please nerf that hitbox on Commander, guys, please! That being said, that's going to conclude my review of Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree. I did a lot of yapping in this video, and not only do I think that I didn't fully cover everything, but I also don't know how much of it actually made any sense. Not that it really matters because I'm just some hooligan on the internet making these videos for the shits and giggles. Nonetheless, I hope that this review was somewhat informative. If you've played through the DLC, please let me know your thoughts on it. As for what's next, I gotta get back to Dark Souls 2 as well as repair my social life. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.